Good afternoon. My name is Susan Olson. I'm the chair of the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. I'd like to welcome you here today for the first gun rights or women's rights rally. We're here on the steps of the State House in Concord, New Hampshire. The legislature has just been seated, and they'll start up after the first of the year. We wanted to be here today to let our legislators know that we are serious about defending protecting our Second Amendment rights. You're going to hear from a number of speakers this afternoon to talk about why they believe that the protection of these rights is so important. So, thank you for coming, and we're going to get started here in just a few minutes.
Hi there, my name is Jane Cormier, and I am here at today's rally for gun rights, our women's rights here in Concord, New Hampshire. It's a pleasure to be a speaker here today. And it's to let our legislators know that we are very concerned that our Second Right amendments are taken care of and are properly protected, and we're ready to put that word out there. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon. We've done this before, in worse weather, but I think what that tells us today is those of us who've shown up are the ones who take this issue very seriously. So I want to thank each and every one of you, not just attendees, but the folks who've shown up with equipment, with tents, hot chocolate, and with everything. Thank you so much. My name is Susan Olson, and I'd like to welcome you to the Gun Rights, or Women's Rights Rally, the first of its kind here in New Hampshire, certainly, and maybe the first of its kind here in the country. So if you will, I'd like you to please uncover and join me in the Cadets' Prayer from West Point. Lord, make us choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never to be contented with a half-truth when the whole truth can be won. Endow us with courage that is born of loyalty to all that is noble and worthy, that scorns to compromise with vice and injustice, and knows no fear when right and truth are in jeopardy. Amen. Those of you who've been here before, and those of you who are around the State House, know the Honorable Jane Cormier, who's going to lead us in the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the
one of the most amazing women I've ever met in my life. She is probably one of the strongest Second Amendment supporters I know, especially when it comes to women. Because you don't often meet a lot of women who are very vocal about their Second Amendment rights. Until today, of course. I don't even know what else to say about Susan. She is just one of the most amazing people. Most of you know her. She is always up here fighting for our rights, whether it's Second Amendment legislation or other things. She truly represents Live Free or Die New Hampshire. And I'm proud to say she adopted me.
Thank you, Kim. And those of you who don't want to be in the damp and the cold, I think there's plenty of room under the tents to stay dry if you can. I have struggled these past few days with the remarks that I wanted to make today. As most of you know, I have railed against the New Hampshire Department of Safety unilaterally deciding whether or not I am a suitable person. I have bemoaned this week's hijacking of the New Hampshire House of Representatives by a progressive poser. I have seen the legislative service request by Concord Representative Catherine Rogers laying out once more, the first steps towards firearm registration. I hardly knew where to begin, but those of you who know me know that I was born and raised in the Republic of Texas. So instead, I'm going to tell you a little story. In 1831, a decade into the independence of Mexico from the Spanish Empire, the Mexican government sent a small cannon to the village of Gonzales so it might defend itself from increasingly frequent Comanche raids. 4 years later, while trying to stem growing political unrest, that same Mexican government demanded that they return the cannon, an act that would have left Gonzales effectively defenseless against raiders, government or otherwise. That demand was refused, and the Mexican government sent soldiers to retrieve the cannon. In the days leading up to the arrival of the soldiers, 2 women of the town, Eveline DeWitt and her mother, Sarah Seeley DeWitt, cut up a dress to produce a flag to fly and symbolize the struggle. They drew on history, they drew on their schooling, and they echoed the words of King Leonidas at the Battle of Thermopylae. In Greek, Molo Labe, come and take it. We have that flag back here behind our crowd. Come and take it. In the early morning hours of October 2nd, 1835, the Mexican troops tried, and they failed. 65 years before Gonzales, the British government sought to disarm the American colonists. They tried, and they failed. But governments still do not seem to have learned that lesson. Rights cannot be taken. They can only be surrendered. The right to defend oneself against tyranny in any form is a right with which each and every one of us is born. And that brings me to today. As a young woman, I was forced to defend myself and my property from people who objected to my chosen occupation. They did not want to reason with me. They did not want to bargain with me. They wanted, if not to do me actual physical harm, to terrify me into surrender. But rather than be subjected to their form of tyranny, I took up arms to defend myself. 40 years later, I find myself doing the same thing. But then I was a young woman, armed against men who meant to do me harm. Today, you'll hear from women who have found themselves in similar situations. Make no mistake, the right to keep and bear arms against the threat of tyranny is not reserved for men. Gun rights are also women's rights. So why is it, somebody tell me, why is it that women like Catherine Rogers, or Wendy Piper, or Andrews Ahern, Elaine Andrews Ahern, seek to limit my birthright, to limit our birthright to self-defense? Is it that they believe the threat of government tyranny no longer exists? Is it that they believe there is no one who needs to do them harm? Or is it that they believe someone else will save them? Worse, are they fearful of you and me? 2 years ago, a Russian writer penned this. He said, "Do not believe for a moment that progressives and other leftists hate guns. What they hate is guns in the hands of those who will not march in lockstep with their ideology. They hate guns in the hands of those who think for themselves, who refuse to comply, and eventually will have to be scheduled for a barrel behind the ear." George Orwell wrote this in his novel 1984, and I've shortened this a bit. Now I will tell you the answer to my question. It is this. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. All the others were cowards and hypocrites. They pretended, perhaps even they believed, that they had seized power unwillingly for only a limited time, and that just around the corner there lay a paradise where human beings would be free and equal. We are not like that. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard the revolution. The object of power is power. Now you begin to understand me, and I think now we begin to understand them. On December 1st, 1982, just 32 short years ago, the people of New Hampshire, of this state, voted to amend the state's constitution, declaring that, quote, all persons have the right to keep and bear arms in defense of themselves, their families, their property, and the state. Why would Rogers, Piper, or Andrews Ahern, or any other legislator, or any other person serving the people of New Hampshire seek to limit that specifically reaffirmed right? What, or perhaps more alarmingly, who do they fear? As you know, 3 days ago, the 2015-2016 session of the New Hampshire legislature was seated, and we have at least two legislators here with us today. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. On Wednesday, we witnessed firsthand the seizing of power. Was it for the $100 a year? I don't think so. Gun rights, like all of our natural rights, are not just women's rights. They belong to all of us. They cannot be taken. They can only be surrendered. So like Evelyn and Sarah Seelig and every other lover of liberty, past and present, we must defend them. That's our charge, that's our mission. That's why we're here, that's why most of us are here today. This is what we have to do. So I thank you for coming. I have some wonderful people here to speak to you today, and if you want to take a moment and get a little cup of hot chocolate or coffee, please do so. Thank you so much. No takers for hot beverages, huh? One, of course. Nice to see you, Bob. Our next speaker is someone most of you know, either from being around the State House with me or with education issues. Michelle Lavelle. I'm proud to introduce her today as the Vice President and Chief Range Safety Officer for the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. She is a long-time, hardcore Second Amendment advocate here in Concord and in the state. She was the 2014 New Hampshire Liberty Alliance Activist of the Year. She's also the mother of 3 extraordinary children, the wife of a very tall man, and my good friend. Please welcome Michelle Lavelle.
Wow, 5 years ago, I never would have imagined that I would speak at a Second Amendment rally. We all have different paths that have brought us here today. I'm going to tell you about mine. On a bright and very pleasant November morning in 2010, my husband was at work and I was homeschooling 2 of my 3 children. My daughter was studying inside in the family room, and my second son accompanied me outside to go do some chores. As we opened the garage bay door, I was stunned to see a car backed into our driveway and a strange man standing there next to our tall retaining wall. Before I had a chance to gather my thoughts, I heard my front doorbell ring. My dog rushed back inside, and I told my son to head in too. I tried to quickly gather my wits, so I asked the man what I could do for him. Front doorbell continued to ring. He began to tell me about a missing dog. Being the dog lover that I am, I asked him to describe this missing pet. He told me that it was a chocolate Labrador retriever that he was looking for, but he seemed very nervous. He called to the person at my front door, telling her that they had to be on their way. That was when I noticed that the car had Massachusetts license plates. So, trying to think on my feet, I asked him if he lived on one of the 2 adjacent roads, Bramley Hill or Candlewood. Then he really got flustered and just said, over there, with this vague gesture. As his partner, a woman approached us. He told her that I had not seen their missing dog. So she began to then describe a boxer mixed mutt. Okay, so as he was trying to rush his accomplice into the car, I asked him, can I get your phone number in case I happen to find your missing dog? It made him nervous. And I even went so far as to offer to contact all my neighbors and let them know he had a missing dog in our neighborhood. He thanked me for my help and left as quickly as he possibly could. Then I stood there and I'm thinking, okay, what just happened? Am I being paranoid? It happened so fast. So I finished my chores, made a cup of coffee, called my husband, still kind of in this state of disbelief. Am I overreacting? Am I just imagining this? Who would do that? We're in a quiet little neighborhood. I didn't want to call the police if I really didn't have to. But my husband reassured me, no, this made sense, give him a call, let him know what happened. So a short time later, I saw a police cruiser drive by in our cul-de-sac. And then I saw another one a few minutes later. Things were quiet, but a couple hours later, the local police chief came by the house to give me an update. Apparently, our local department had called in extra help and canine units from 4 surrounding towns. The chief said that as one of their cruisers drove down an adjacent street, they found that car. The woman apparently laid on the horn as soon as she saw the police car, and somebody had bolted from a house. The woman was found with a car full of stolen items, and she was ultimately charged with 2 felons. The police never found the man. Never found him. They suspect that those 2 had a third person in the neighborhood that he called and got picked up from him. I was so lucky that day. God was watching over us, I know it. I was totally caught unprepared. Thank God that man did not have a violent intention. It only became nervous and not hostile when I challenged him. That encounter could have gone very, very differently. And I was not ready for it. So that night, I made a promise to myself and my family. I promised that I would never again allow us to be so vulnerable again. I realized it's up to me to protect myself and my family at any notice, no notice. I have to be the one that's ready to do this. My family will not be victims. I have the right to protect myself and my family. I will not tolerate somebody trying to take that right from me, and I will not tolerate the attitude that only certain people are entitled to that right. So often we hear from people like Anna Gifford and her type that say only some people are supposed to be protected. How can you talk about protecting women, children, and their families without talking about how to empower them to do that for themselves? Second Amendment rights are not just for some, but for all. And I will defend that right every single time. Thank you.
I don't know what I would have done had I found myself in a situation like that. I don't think I'd have been so quick-witted. I don't think I'd have had the presence of mind to try to stall this person. I think Michelle's wit and sense is equally as dangerous as the abilities that I've witnessed on the range. So thank you, Michelle. We each have come to this. Some women come to firearms as a child with their father or their brothers hunting. Some women come to firearms as a hobby for target shooting or through the Appleseed classes. And most of the women that I've met in my life have come to firearms the same way that I did, the same way that Michelle did. And I fear that for many years I took my right to self-defense for granted. I didn't really think about what the Bill of Rights promised me, what the New Hampshire Constitution promised and guaranteed me. But I understand clearly that these are natural rights. They cannot be taken, nor be surrendered. Our next speaker, you've already heard her sing. She talks better than she sings, believe it or not. Jane Cormier, former state rep from Alton, Belknap. I never remember the third one, whatever it was. Belknap 8, Belknap District 8, yeah. She finished her first term, moved to Hooksett for business, decided she didn't like what was going on in the New Hampshire Senate, and challenged an incumbent. From ground zero, she ran a race that I think probably exemplified how one should run a race. She almost kicked Dave Bruton's ass. She lost by only 400 votes on the entire Senate district. And what that tells us is that we don't have to settle for the way things are. We don't have to settle for the legislature the way it is. We witness these power grabs like we saw this past week. And we have to think about it. Is that the way we want to live? Is that the way New Hampshire should operate? Is that the way elected representatives should deal with their constituents? So let me introduce Jane Cormier, former state rep, Senate candidate. She's a writer, she's a blogger, she's also the director of New Hampshire's newest opera company, Jane Cormier.
Oh my, it's cold out there. You guys are patriots for coming out and standing in this. It's I would rather snow than rain, but okay, that's just me. All right, so today I thought that being a person that's now not sitting in one of these seats, I really take my mission of communication very, very seriously. And I really believe that no matter what happens in these hallowed halls, the real battle lies in getting to the hearts and minds of our fellow citizens to inform them and engage them and to debate the issues that we see, especially the power issues that we see. And certainly there's nothing more on the radar right now for the progressive left than to find ways to incrementally steal away our Second Amendment natural rights. I came across a story when I was trying to find a way to perhaps put something forth that was a little new, and I saw a story that really struck me, so I figured that I would tell you the story. We'll try to tell this story as an effective communication tool. In 2007, Jean Asen shot a gunman at New Life Church in Colorado. She saved countless lives that day. Being a believer that we should acknowledge goodness and strength when we see it, her story is one of goodness and strength. A few seconds after the first rifle blast outside the New Life Church in Colorado Springs, Asen hears all the screams. The shots continue outside a set of double glass doors in the snowy parking lot where one person already lies dead. The noise gets progressively louder. Glass in one of the doors explodes, then another. New Life Church serves more than 10,000 worshipers each week, and thousands of people are leaving the mega church following the December 9th, 2007 service. Some of them are dodging bullets. A wave of panicked churchgoers bears down on Asen's position near the center of the church, a tent-like colossus rising from a 42-acre campus. Asen, in her second month as a volunteer security guard for the church, is more than 100 yards away from the exploding doors. Between her and the doorway are multiple hallways and classrooms, and they are filling with terrified people. "Jean," screamed one of the team security members. "He's coming through the doors." Asen's 42 years old, small with blonde hair and green eyes. She wears a suit jacket and blue jeans, and she has found a purpose these past months at this church. Now looking at the hallway, she pulls out her 9mm Beretta that's tucked in the front of her jeans and begins sprinting through the crush of people that are running past her. There are many more blasts at the doors, more people, more screams, and then suddenly nothing. The corridor has emptied. People have taken over cover in rooms, some are hiding in bathroom stalls. In the distance, Asim sees the man opening one of the doors and he's holding the weapon. He moves slowly but deliberately. Asim can only think of one thing. I need to end this right now. She rushes toward the hallway to her right and she stands close to the wall, puts her Beretta at a low ready position and prays. Matthew Murray, a thin 24-year-old man, is wearing blue earplugs, a flak jacket, and a backpack as he walks up the corridor. He's holding a Bushmaster AR-style rifle. Murray also has two 9mm handguns, and he's carrying at least 1,000 rounds of ammunition. He fires his weapon down the hallway again and again. He is the plague who's come to wipe out those who have sinned against him. From Asim's hiding place, the shots are deafening, and she can hear the man actually mumbling between firing rounds. He fires again. Asim is calm but alert. God be with me, she thinks. She steps from behind the wall, gun stretched from her body. Murray is 20 yards away, and she yells, "Drop your weapon." The man jerks his rifle toward Asim. She fires 5 more quick shots. Murray falls backward. Asim moves to the middle of the corridor and rushes forward. She's 12 feet now from Murray, exposed in the middle of the hallway. "Drop your weapon or I will kill you," she yells. Murray sits up to face her. He's still holding his rifle. Boom, boom, boom. Bullets race past her and they pepper the wall behind her. Murray shoots. Asim fires 3 times. Through the haze of the gun smoke, Asim sees the man struggling on the floor. He props up his head against the wall. Her weapon is up and trained on the man. She sees his hand moving near his shoulder. He's trying to pull the pin on a grenade. He's going to kill everyone around. She instinctively steps back and fires 2 more rounds. There is no doubt this woman and her gun saved thousands of lives on that day. For the people who want to disarm men and women under the guise of safety concerns, we should make them read her story. By making ownership cumbersome or even illegal, we know this is the end game. I say no person and no entity on the face of this earth has the right to obstruct our natural right of self-defense. We are facing so many important and pressing issues in our country today. Make no mistake, the Second Amendment is one of the most important. The incrementalism of the progressive mission to disarm America is the cause for alarm and action. We cannot be silent. We cannot be cowed. We must stand as this brave woman stood. And we must stand against any and all violation of our natural right to self-defense. And stand we will. Thank you.
I've forgotten that story. She's right. If we are prepared, if we are confident, if we are well trained, there are few foes we cannot overcome. And you see behind me this blue banner, and you see the hats that some of us have on. We are a new organization formed just this summer called the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. We're strictly New Hampshire based. Our belief, as Jane articulated, is that we have the natural right, we have the duty, we have the obligation to defend ourselves and our family, our property, and our state. We are dedicated as an organization to training women who are either new to firearms, who perhaps are coming from a personal event like I did or Michelle did, and seeking knowledge of how to defend ourselves. We also decided that equally as important as the training and education of women and their firearms is the advocacy part of it. Michelle, Jane, myself, Kim, one of our other speakers who's running a little bit late. Most of the women here, we are determined to stand here in the State House when we need to, for as long as we need to, and fight the types of legislation, the types of attitudes, types of inclinations to restrict our rights, whether it's universal background checks and stopping that awful gun show loophole, which doesn't exist. Or listening to legislators trying to explain that, yes, I support the Second Amendment, but, ... We're ready with women who are knowledgeable, trained, determined, and serious about preserving our natural lives. So that's where we come from, Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. We have a number of our members here today under this blue tent. We also let men join, although we don't give you the right to vote. You're going to have to wait a century or so for that. But one of the wonderful things that has come out of not just the newness of the league, but today's rally is that the men we love, the men we admire, the men about whom we care, also support our rights. They trust us. They want us equally capable of taking care of ourselves. And for that, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm going to ask our next speaker to join me up here. Those of you who wander around social media or listen to the radio or read newspapers already know the name Kimberly Morin. She is a journalist. She is a blogger. She's a talk radio host. She's a director of media for the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. She's an NRA certified instructor. She's also my friend, Kim. Please welcome Kimberly Morin.
I tell them not to make me laugh, and what do? They start laughing and giggling. And I forgot to mention as well that Susan is also the chairwoman of the Women's Defense League. I didn't mention that before. As well as being an instructor. And my mentor. So, I've been asked why we're holding a gun rights rally in December, in the beginning. Legislators were just sworn in, bills haven't been created in full yet, and the new session is just beginning. Well, before the election was even over, Gabby Giffords and her organization, Americans for a Responsible Solution, was in New Hampshire. They were in New Hampshire to embark on a tour titled Protecting All Women. In reality, they were here to meet with only anti-Second Amendment extremists and the Democrat Party, as well as other left-wing organizations who promote gun control and would prefer an outright repeal of the Second Amendment. They actually asked 2 Second Amendment activists, who happen to be here today, to lead the meeting. So much for all women. Ironic that her organization was here right about the time a study came out calling New Hampshire the safest state in America. Why? Because we have an extremely low crime rate. So why was Americans for Responsible Solutions in New Hampshire? If they're really concerned about protecting all women from gun violence or violence, why aren't they in places like Chicago and DC, where there are extremely high rates of violence in general? Because it's not about protecting all women. It's not trying to solve gun violence or violence. It's about gun control, period. If they were interested in protecting all women, they'd be handing out 357s, training classes, and ammo. They wouldn't be trying to infringe upon women's rights to protect ourselves by pushing more gun control laws. And of course, then you have Moms Demand Action. They're always pushing for gun control. A group that was outed as not being grassroots, but being an organization run by paid hacks. I'm sorry, but I don't need some unhappy mom who doesn't get any action at home and is paid by a billionaire who has armed security to tell me how to protect myself or my family. These organizations are not about stopping gun violence or crime in general. They are, again, about gun control. Remember when Bloomberg's Mayors Against Illegal Guns came to New Hampshire and they held a vigil for those killed by firearms?
No more names.
If you recall, they memorialized one of the Boston bombers and a cop killer. Most mayors that were in that organization fled because they discovered that it wasn't about illegal guns or gun violence. It was about putting gun control into place for legal, law-abiding gun owners. And so they just keep morphing into new groups because Bloomberg has lots of money to waste. But make no mistake, anti-Second Amendment extremists come from both sides of the aisle. Although they are typically of the left-wing version, aka Democrats, there are Republicans who are also in bed with these people. Remember Scott Brown? How about Mitt Romney? They both banned assault weapons in Massachusetts, then expected us to forget about that and vote them into national office. I know because I lived in Massachusetts when under their rule. And it wasn't until I wanted to practice my Second Amendment right and protect myself that I realized that it was almost gone. That's when I really finally got sick of the nanny state and fled to New Hampshire, where I can actually practice my Second Amendment rights and protect myself as a woman and protect my family. Right now, we have new legislators that were just sworn into office, as well as many legislators who were re-elected. In a complete speaker scam, which Miss Susan spoke a little about, we ended up with a Republican House Speaker who has a 36% rating from the New Hampshire Firearms Coalition and a 43% rating from the NRA. His Chief of Staff only has a 42% rating from the NRA. The new Speaker was elected by a majority of Democrats who are, most likely, anti-Second Amendment extremists. If you thought gun control legislation was going to be on the back burner because the House and Senate hold Republican majorities, think again. Representatives have been adding what are called legislative service requests. They're just basically a title of a bill, and eventually the text will go along with the bill. The House's deadline was Friday, so we have a lot of bills in there, and then the Senate's is this week coming up. One of those LSRs, as they're called, is titled Requiring Background Checks for All Commercially Advertised Firearm Sales. That's all we know about it. But it's a bill being put forth by a representative who is a complete anti-Second Amendment extremist, a Democrat named Catherine Rogers, who pushed HB 1589 last year. I'm sure many of you remember that fight. This is a representative who believes that all assault weapons should be banned, including all forms of semi-automatic weapons. She also believes that the state should increase restrictions on the purchase and possession of firearms. Apparently this woman doesn't take her oath of office to protect our rights under the New Hampshire Bill of Rights seriously. No anti-Second Amendment extremist does. Rogers is also a rep who is pro-choice when it comes to abortion, but not when it comes to women protecting their living children. Aside from control, why are these people, especially those who are out of state, pushing more anti-Second Amendment legislation? Politics. In Gifford's Protecting All Women tour, she came to New Hampshire and went to Iowa, the two first in the nation states. Then, of course, it was off to all the big swing states. Their plan is to push this through 2016 and make it a big part of their campaigns. These people are not only trying to take our rights away, but playing with our rights as politics as well. So what are we going to do about it? Flip the narrative. Long ago, the antis, that's what I call them, the antis, decided that men were manly and shouldn't need firearms to protect themselves and their family. To some degree, this has worked. What they didn't plan on is the increasing number of women who have taken their own protection seriously. Millions of women across the country own firearms, and that number has increased greatly over the past few years. As women see more and more of their rights being stripped away by anti-Second Amendment extremists, they are speaking out. We aren't going to go away quietly and bake cookies in the kitchen while these people do everything possible to either make it illegal for us to protect ourselves or make it more difficult for us to protect ourselves. Why would anyone want a woman to remain powerless when we can be powerful? A firearm is an equalizer for women, and women who have used firearms to protect themselves are survivors. They want us to be victims. We can't wait minutes for 911 when seconds count. You can't claim to be about equal rights for women and then take some of those rights away from us. Gun rights are women's rights. You try to take my Second Amendment rights away, you are trampling on my rights as a woman, a Granite Stater, and an American. We cannot tolerate it, and will work to make sure that any legislator who attempts to do this knows exactly who we are. You need to know who your legislator is and know their stance and/or voting record. You need to hold them accountable for protecting your rights under both the New Hampshire Constitution and the United States Constitution. If you don't already know it, find out your representative's voting record. Find out their stance on Second Amendment rights. Make sure you pay attention to legislation coming up. Don't worry, we, as well as other Second Amendment organizations in New Hampshire, will definitely alert you. You need to take action on a regular basis. Inform your neighbors and friends about the truth when it comes to gun stats. The antis use bogus studies and fairy tale facts to push their gun control messaging onto unsuspecting Americans. Every single one of their bogus statistics has been debunked over and over again. Simply use the facts to inform others. People like knowing the truth, and they get really, really pissed off when they find out they were lied to. When you leave here today, know that there are people who will be coming into this building behind me who are going to try to infringe upon your rights. They don't care if you're a single mom who wants to protect her children or a guy who wants to protect himself. They don't care if you enjoy shooting sports or shooting targets. They don't care that criminals don't get background checks or obey the laws. What they care about is power and control. The more control they have over all of us, the more power they have. Are you willing to hand them that power? Are you willing to give up control of your own protection? The fight doesn't end here. It begins here. If they want a battle, they're going to get one. And women are going to be on the front line. Thank you.
Well, you heard it from her. We're going to be here, looking to defend and protect not only our Second Amendment rights, but our rights to liberty. We've had, we decided this year, those of you that watched the legislature last year and saw what happened over a bill called entitled Senate Bill 244. We call it the Mental Illness is a Crime Bill. It was introduced into the Senate under the guise of making sure that people with mental health issues weren't able to purchase a gun. Currently, they are prohibited persons under the federal statute, but the state of New Hampshire, and the senator in particular, thought, well, gee whiz, let's turn over the records of every person in New Hampshire who on the books has had some type of mental health issue. It could be, gosh, I don't know, coming home from military service and having a small bout of PTSD. It could be my mother who at an advanced age was incapable of taking care of herself and needed a guardian appointed on her behalf. It could be a woman with postpartum depression. It could be someone who had a really bad day at work and said, you know what, I've just had enough. This bill would have appointed those people's names to something called the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which is managed by the FBI and ATF. Once your name is on that list, you don't get off. But we're going to keep people, crazy people, from getting guns. We fought that bill in the Senate, and alongside us, oddly enough, was the American Civil Liberties Union and the New Hampshire Disabilities Rights Coalition, because they believed, as we did, that people have certain rights. Just because maybe you've had a tough time or having a tough time, it doesn't mean that you surrender your rights. There was blood all over the floor, not literally, but figuratively, after that bill fought. Gun groups here in New Hampshire were at each other's throats because we looked at it differently. It's not going to happen again. Over the summer and over this fall, we've had meetings among all of the Second Amendment groups in New Hampshire. Pro-Gun New Hampshire, Gun Owners of America, New Hampshire Firearms Coalition, Gun Rights Across America, National Association of Gun Rights, NRA, ILA. And we've sat down and we said, folks, we're on the same team. We have a common purpose. But it also looks like we have a common enemy. So how do we approach this? We have a new coalition. It doesn't really have a name. We call it the Peace Summit. But we've joined together as organizations to monitor legislation, to work with our various member groups, to let them know, to keep them apprised of these issues, and to tell them, today you need to be at Concord, today you need to fight this, join us. We may have differences over a couple of things, but that's okay. We still understand that the goal on the horizon is the defense and security of our natural rights. So watch for us. We'll be at the State House. We'll be coming en masse during the first weeks of the legislature, although this new speaker may not allow it, I don't know. But we intend to introduce ourselves to the relevant committees, whether it's criminal justice, or the judiciary, and to tell them that we are New Hampshire's firearms people. We're here, we're paying attention, we're watching. And I am so happy to see our speaker show up here under the brown tent. Another woman you'll be surprised to know. She is, and let me get to my lengthy list, an NRA certified pistol instructor. She's a hunter education instructor. She's a certified range safety officer. She is a metallic cartridge and shotgun shell reloading instructor. She is a level 1, 2, and 3 graduate of the Lethal Force Institute. She also happens to be an attorney. Penny Dean, one of New Hampshire's foremost practitioners in defense of our Second Amendment rights. Penny, would you join me here on the podium? I'm so glad to see you. She's amazing. Steps are a little cruddy today, but welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, I've come with nothing but bad news. There's no good news here. None.
Come on, I don't believe it.
Sorry.
Really good news.
Because my goal is what's called reality. It's not called pat you on the back and say everything's okay. Oh, closer? I'm sorry. I love it when they tell me to speak up. I've always been told I have a big mouth, and now they say be noisier. So what I want to tell you guys about today is what's called the slice of bologna theory, or the boiling frog theory. And it's happening here in New Hampshire, sadly to say, every day. Every day. And here's what I find all the time, is anybody with a computer can write things on the internet. Doesn't make them true, doesn't make them accurate, but it can sound really nice. I have people come to me every day and they say, New Hampshire is a shall issue state. And I say, no, it's not. As a practical reality, it is not. Now, they said, but the law says this. I go, yeah, the law does say that. They said, so tell me why I'm wrong. And my father had this saying, and I've looked for the source and looked for the source, and I can't find it, so he may be the originator of it. And he's unfortunately passed, so I can't ask him. And he said, it is not he who is the maker of law that is the giver of law, which means the legislature. The legislature truly doesn't make the law. You think they do. We hope they do. But the practical reality, at least in this state, is they don't. It is he who interpreteth the law that is the giver of law. And that's important to know because in New Hampshire, we appoint our trial and appellate, which in New Hampshire is the Supreme Court judges for life. For life, think about this. That's pretty important to know. And so I want to take you back to the history, and I hate to say it, that my gender has not always been treated equally by the authorities, especially when it comes to firearms. Because after all, honey, a little 22 will do you just fine. And I get that, you know, I can tell you stories about people that say to different women, I go, well, what do you need that for? And the answer is, it isn't even a matter of need, even though they do need it. It's a matter of want, and it's a constitutional right. We shouldn't have to justify constitutional rights. You know, these wise old men a few hundred years ago wrote it down on this piece of paper. And I know we don't use it much anymore, but we actually should use it, and could use it. It's kind of a smart document. There's never been an entity, a governmental entity, a country, really in the history of the world that has lasted of our type as long as we have. And I say we're deteriorating every day. And I go back to the fact, as a practical matter in this society, very few people stay home every day all day. They go to the grocery store, they go to school to pick their kids up, they have a job, most of them, they have to work. We actually work rather than get the public dole. So we have to go out every day in public, which means not all members of the public are nice people. You know, we, and this includes men too, can be raped, robbed, and beaten through a variety of factors. Sometimes disparity of force, sometimes disparity of numbers, sometimes flat bad luck. But the bottom line is we have a constitutional right to protect ourselves. But when we have a state, and I'm talking this state and these courts, who deny us that right wholesale, we have to look at it and say, what is happening here and what can we do about it? And here's what I find to be the most unfortunate thing. Unless you're a Native American, every one of us is an immigrant. Some of us are immigrants from other states. And the problem is, and not enough people are willing to come forward and talk about these things. I represent a lot of people, most of which, even though I begged them to let me tell their story, will not, because of public embarrassment, who maybe when they were 18 or 20, did something they shouldn't have done. Broke in a neighbor's house, did things, and they've changed their life. They've got 20, 30, 40 years of good behavior. They made one bad decision and made one mistake. If you come from the communist wealth of Massachusetts, short of a gubernatorial pardon, which I don't need to tell you the statistics or the likeliness of a gubernatorial pardon, you are barred for life from owning a firearm. That's a really big deal. Now, some of those people are guilty of 2.5-year misdemeanors, and one of the biggest bits of misunderstanding that I spend my life trying to educate people on is, I have people tell me every day, well, I don't have a domestic violence that's against me, I've never had a felony, so therefore I can have a gun. And my answer is, many, many states, communist wealth in Massachusetts and others, when they found out about the federal, what's called the 2-year bar, which means if you have been convicted of a misdemeanor for which you could have received more than 2 years potential imprisonment, no matter how much imprisonment you did or didn't get, even if you didn't pay a fine, you are barred under federal law from owning a firearm. And the problem with that is even what you'd call experienced defense attorneys do not know that. I talk to good, solid attorneys every day, and I try to tell them firearms is really a kind of a niche area of the law. Because they tell me, oh, this guy doesn't have any felonies. I said, yeah, but he's got a misdemeanor from Mass. And they go, so? Well, he's barred under federal law. And some of them actually spend a few minutes arguing with me. And I say, well, you might want to read the statute. Because I'm pretty sure he is. And so the reason that all these things become important is even in cases where people are wrongfully arrested, and let's say the charges are dismissed, or they go to trial and they're found not guilty, New Hampshire chiefs of police are regularly denying these people licenses to carry. Every day of the week. This isn't just weird, anomalies. This isn't just a little bit here and there. It happens every day, everywhere. And a lot of these people who come to me sometimes suck it up and live with it, which is a really sad thing. And they don't go to court for two reasons. Number one, it's expensive. Number two, it's public. There's a saying in the news industry, if it bleeds, it leads. Anything pertaining to firearms, they're going to be on the front page. And if you work at a company that isn't particularly firearm friendly, do you want the front page of the paper saying that you've been denied a license because X, Y, Z, so they know you own guns and are trying to get a license to carry a loaded, concealed handgun? What type of person wants to do that? They're afraid of their job. It's tough economic times. And the third reason is I have to tell them, your odds are that of a lottery ticket. And I had a guy yesterday say to me, well, what are my odds here, 50-50? I said, no, lottery ticket. He goes, no, really? I go, no, really, it's lottery ticket. This man has 0 convictions. Now, has he been arrested and charged before? Absolutely. Charges have been dismissed or nullified because according to him, they were BS charges, and if the Commonwealth thought they were good charges, they would have brought him forward, right? But these charges were dismissed against him. But because he's been arrested for these horrible things, they won't give him a license to carry. Now this particular man is brave enough to take what I call lottery odds. But think of this, when we are appealing a denial from an application for a license to carry, a constitutional right, should we face lottery odds in our courts? I mean, is that right? Does that make sense to anybody here? It's just plain wrong. And where it happened, I can, basically trace what I call the path. Years ago, Al Rebega used to be the president of Gun Owners in New Hampshire, and he was seeing certain judges, everyone knows, although very few people other than me who's willing to risk all sorts of discipline and all sorts of things will name what I call the bad judges. But most lawyers are like, you won't hear the bad judges publicly out of their mouth, because they're reasonably afraid. We're afraid. And the bottom line is that we all know who the bad judges are, who you won't get a fair shake in front of. And so Al Rebega, seeing that, petitioned the legislature, and we passed another law, RSA 159-6E, which basically said that you have a right, if your right's under RSA 159-6, which is where you apply for a license to carry a concealed firearm, if your rights are abridged or denied, you have a right to petition the Superior Court. And the reason for that addition was the judges are appointed for life in New Hampshire. They knew in some district courts you were never going to get a fair shot with firearms. So it gave people an opportunity to go to the Superior Court in their jurisdiction. Gave them another option. And anyone who reads the legislative history can see that clear as a bell. If anybody has any 5th graders or maybe 3rd graders, they could read it and say, this is pretty clear to us what was intended here. But it sure wasn't clear to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And in 2009, in Grand v. Town of Exeter, which is a case of mine, lost miserably I might add, I appealed his denial, full of this letter that said he was accused of all these horrible things, including he had been investigated for 1st or 2nd degree murder and investigated for all these things. And I said, great, we'd like discovery, because he's been investigated for all these things over 2 years. Who died? Oh, they wouldn't tell us that. It's an ongoing investigation. But he'd been investigated for all those things. So we applied to the Superior Court, which is in Rockingham, in his particular jurisdiction. And the trial judge there said to me, we don't accept license to carry cases in the Superior Court. You need to appeal to the District Court. And I said, my entire career, I've never once appealed to the District Court, ever. And the Superior Court has decided my cases, and the Supreme Court has decided my cases. He said, well, that's not the case. We're going to dismiss it. You filed in the wrong place. And my answer was, well, my colleague, John Evans, had a license to carry a case in your course a few months ago. Here's your signature on it. How do you explain this, right? If they're not allowed in his court, why do you let that one in his court? Well, first, judges don't have to answer our questions. We have to answer theirs. I didn't get an answer, but that should ask all of you about due process, that old 14th Amendment, one of those other old pieces of paper that were written years ago. Does it still matter? And we have to ask ourselves, is that fair? And so when I appealed this case to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, And I want to read the brief quote from the New Hampshire Supreme Court, because the first thing I said to them is, look it, I've appealed many cases from the Superior Court to your court before, and you have decided those cases. So if there is no jurisdiction, the court has an obligation, what's called sua sponte, to kick it back down and say, look it, trial court, you had no jurisdiction in this case to begin with. So they had decided several of my cases. Several. And they said, we note that in Silverstein, after stating that an appeal under RSA 159(6)(c) is limited to the issue of whether the petitioner is entitled to a license, we stated in dicta. And what is called dicta in the law is basically comments, but they aren't part of the opinion itself. They're not part of the ruling. I thought what they stated was part of the ruling. They now clarified for that for me to tell me it was dicta. Of course, up to that point it had been law, but now it's dicta, because remember, the person in black robes decides what it is. And said, a separate appeal avenue to the Superior Court is provided for alleged violations of the licensing sections of RSA Chapter 159 by a licensing authority. Well, stupid me, I thought Chapter 159(6) was part of 159. And I thought if you had a violation of that, that's what the clear meaning said. But I guess I was wrong. They continued to say, see RSA 159(6)(e), Echo, 2002. Silverstein, 150 NH at 681. We now clarify, they're clarifying for us, that our reference to RSA 159(6)(e) Echo as an avenue of appeal was mistaken. They made that mistake, I guess, in a few cases. A petition under that section is addressed to the original jurisdiction of the Superior Court. So I'm like, okay, so even though the law says it, even though I've appealed everyone there, now you're going to clarify it and say, nope, we can't go here anymore. So now you're limited to the district court. Well, you say, well, what's the problem with that? We have several problems. Number one, by statute, the district court has to hold a hearing within 14 days. And you say, well, that's great. And I say, wait a minute, what if you want discovery from the police department about why they denied your client's license? Would you like to know that information before you walk in the door? And the answer is, well, yeah, I'd like to. And they should have all that information there because that's the basis for their denial. Well, they don't have time in that short 14 days to gather all this information and give it to you. There just isn't time. They're too busy. They have other things to do. And so then you have a choice between waiting beyond 14 days and discovery. And even then, they sometimes won't let you have discovery. I recently tried a case, ironically, in Rockingham Superior Court again, and where the judge would not let several witnesses testify, including police officers who had talked to my client over his phone and told him certain things, because what they had to say wasn't relevant. The person who told my client his license wasn't ready, their testimony wasn't relevant. Even though we had audio recordings of them, we wanted to ask them questions, their testimony wasn't relevant. And here's what people, the average person, doesn't understand. The trial judge is above God in his courtroom. They decide what is relevant and what is important and what comes in and what comes out. And that's really important because average people think, well, I'm just going to go to court and tell my story and tell how this chief abused me and tell how he lied about my Second Amendment rights. And because I know I'm telling the truth, once I tell the judge, he's going to understand and everything will be okay. It's not going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. And if you think you're going to go there and do that, you are in a world where you don't know the rules. And the rules will get you every time. And in New Hampshire, we're seeing more and more people denied licenses to carry because of, in many cases, not a conviction history, but an arrest history, even when those charges have been dismissed. Even when every step of the way they've alleged the police have abused them. In some cases because they're a Second Amendment activist. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to take that? Or we need to look at people and say, well, he got arrested for that. Even if the person was arrested and convicted of some minor thing 20 years ago, is there no chance for people to change? Is there no chance that they made a mistake? Or in a lot of cases I get, the people when they were 18 years old were poor. They came from a poor family. They didn't have money to hire a private attorney and an expert witness. And they were told, this is the best deal you can get short of going to jail. And you have to put yourself in those people's shoes. Not everybody's born with a platinum spoon in their mouth and Kennedy bank rolls. You know, they're just not. You know, Teddy Kennedy and all of the Heinz and all those people have a great trust fund. But I can tell you that I grew up so poor, we had a homemade wood stove in our house. I lived in Michigan, where, trust me, it's colder than here. We didn't even buy a store-bought wood stove. We had a homemade wood stove that my uncle made for us. Okay, and we used old trash wood or whatever wood people would let us cut to warm our house. And so not everybody has this giant bit of information. We had a junkyard. We'd fix our cars and keep old radiators because you never knew what radiator you'd have to make fit if one of your old ones broke. So not everybody can write a big fat check to an attorney. Not everybody even has access to the internet. Think about it. If you have a choice between buying groceries every week or paying your internet bill, what you going to pay? You know, everybody isn't, middle class or above. Some people have struggles and hard times and health issues, and we have to look at them and we have to say, they're for the goodness of whoever, go me. And we have to hear their story, and we have to not, as a group, dismiss them, because let me tell you what the antis are doing. They're peeling us off one person at a time. They're disenfranchising us of our firearm rights, one person at a time. And before you know, there's nobody going to be left standing in the I Can Own Firearms pool. And so you need to ask yourself, what do we want to do about that? For example, in New Hampshire, we have an annulment statute, but they keep adding more to things that can't be annulled. They keep adding more to it. And you have to ask yourself, shouldn't we be peeling these things off? And people think, well, I don't want people who use firearms violently to get a free pass. But do you understand if you're ever in a self-defense case, that you're going to be that person? You're going to be charged with felony criminal threatening. So if someone reads your cold record, they're going to say, look at this man, he threatens people with guns, he even shot at them. And you have to ask yourself, what about me? What if that happens to me? And look at these other people and say, we need to look as a broader picture about who we are disenfranchising in firearm rights. And whenever people say that New Hampshire is a shall issue state, every one of you needs to stop them and say, no, it's not. We wish it was. The law says it is. But those people in black robes decide, and they say it's not. Anyone here remember the Blyler case? For those of you who don't remember the Blyler case, it's a really great case. Mr. Blyler was from the Seacoast area, and he's an old fella, and he's really animated, and he's from Boston. He speaks in those great accents that I love. I can't emulate it. And he was in the city attorney's office, and he was telling some animated story, and realized that he was politically active, and he had tried to, let's say, make the police chief's pension a little more fair. That didn't find favor with the police chief, I might add. And he's in there, and he's telling a story, and he takes his revolver out of his pocket, and he slams it down on the guy's desk to make this point. It's part of the story. It's a prop. Now, the man who's there is not offended. He's telling a story. And whether you agree or disagree if he's using a firearm as a prop in a story, we need to think about the larger picture here. He put it back in there. He went on his way. Well, this guy's secretary came in and said, what was all that yelling about? And he says, oh, Blyler's telling one of his stories again. And he tells her what happens. She calls the chief of police. Chief of police trots down there happy as heck, thinking he's going to get Blyler good, right? He says, well, did he threaten you? And he's like, no, he didn't threaten me. He's telling a story. Well, if you were threatened, felony criminal threatening, we could take away his gun rights. You know the whole bit where you can imagine the type of dialogue that goes on there. But the chief of police took his license to carry, said that was bad behavior with a firearm, and therefore he wasn't suitable nor qualified anymore to have a license to carry. He had an attorney, it wasn't me, who appealed it to the trial court and lost, went to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. New Hampshire Supreme Court said, what's the problem? Chief's boss, this guy doesn't, handle firearms properly, so therefore we can jerk his license to carry. Now you have to ask yourself, is that the state we want to live in? Is that how we want to do things? There was no evidence he had his finger on the trigger, no evidence he pointed the fire at him, and the person who was there didn't have a problem with this. And the person who arguably wasn't his best friend, who he was just having dialogue with. But what you had was a chief abusing his power. So one of the other things we need to work on and do in this state is in some towns, chiefs of police are elected. If they're elected, you can unelect them. Think about that. Think about the towns that have bad chiefs. You could unelect them. A lot of chiefs are appointed. You then have to go through and look at the next election and say, see who appointed them and why, and look at if I want to elect that person. Is all this a lot of hard work and research? You're darn right it is. Freedom isn't free. It isn't free. And we all heard the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And every one of us has to stop every day when something happens and say, is this impacting my firearm rights? And if so, how is it? And if you see something happening to someone, you need to go and say, can I help you, or can I offer assistance? Because some people don't realize the resources that a lot of firearm organizations in the state can offer them. And you need to all stick together. Look what just happened in the speaker's race here. I would argue that the man who was elected speaker is not particularly pro-firearm. And that's an understatement, a British-style understatement, which some would say I'm not entitled to. But we have to look at that and say, what's going to happen this year to our bills? I'll tell you what's going to happen. No good firearm bills are going to see the light of day. All the bad ones are going to be expedited through. And we have to be on guard. And let me tell you something. I've been to the State House. I've lived here now for, I think, 18 years, 19 years. I'm trying to think how many, 18, 19 years. And at the firearm hearings, I see the same people every time. I would love to see a new face. And you know what I have people say to me? I have to take the day off work. What do you think I'm doing? Do you think any clients paying me to come down here for 6 hours? I'm taking the day off work. I'm taking away my income. But all of us have vacation days or sick days or whatever they can take lawfully without lying to their employer or get in trouble. They need to come to the State House at least once. You need to write a letter to them and circulate it to everyone. You need to make phone calls to them. All of us need help. We can't do it alone. I see a lot of new faces out here, and I'm happy. Because that means more people are getting in the way, more people are getting involved, and more people are thinking, what can I do about our Second Amendment? And we have to do something because, like the frog, you ever put a frog in nice warm bath water and turn it up, and that frog's happy as heck because he doesn't realize he's getting boiled alive because it's happening in slow degrees. And that's what's happening to us. Our firearm rights are getting taken place by place by place. I've had people at zoning boards say, well, we don't want those type of people in our neighborhood. And I'm like, those type of people? Pray tell me what type of people we're talking about of those type of people. I've said people who are more educated and money than the average American maybe. You don't want those people in your neighborhood. But the bottom line is we're talked about as if we're just other people, those type of people. And I've had literally one person say that and the other people not. And I've called them on it. I said, I want you to describe specifically what you mean by those type of people. Because I find that offensive. And every time we hear things like that, we have to say something. The other thing is it starts in the schools. Every one of you who have children, grandchildren, nieces, or nephews should ask to see those children's textbooks. And if you have a problem with them, you got to bring it out to all of us. Because that is how it starts. You'd be surprised, your own children's education, they're being undermined under you. And you've got to look at that and say, do you want your tax dollars buying books that say the Second Amendment's irrelevant? I mean, you have to think about that. And then they're going to say, well, we bought all these textbooks that we plan on having them last for years. My answer is tough noogie patoogies. I am really cautious of budgets, and I don't believe in wasting money, but there's times I take a razor blade, knife all those pages out of all those books, and make them do that on their own time. Make somebody somewhere do that, because that's what they get for putting garbage in our kids' minds. That's what they get. Okay, I've always been told that I talk too much, so I wanted to ask her to make sure I was not taking more than my fair share of time. And I want anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Penny Dean, and my number is 230-9999. That's easy to remember. And my email address is penny@pennydean.com. If you see bad things happening, please tell me. I have a woman right now who's very brave. She's in a town, and the town clerk there is keeping a list of all the names and addresses and everything of all the people with pistol revolver licenses. That's against the law, okay? We're going to do something about it, and we've been able to do something in certain towns. But here's what I tell her. We have to do things in steps. First, I do a 91A request asking for certain information. Because if you don't catch them, if you don't put them in a corner, some of these people will lie. And I've seen a lot of cases where darn those computers malfunction. Normally they have backups every 30 days, but this section of this computer, there must have been a malfunction because all that stuff just went away. It's amazing how they just have IT departments that selectively back up certain things. And so we have to ask ourselves, we have to challenge each one of those things. And even if you're afraid to challenge it, maybe I can find someone in that same town who arguably has access to the same information, who based on the information you give me, will challenge it. So that's what you have to remember, is even if you're afraid, or maybe you say, I can't afford to lose my job, I'm the sole source of my family, and I don't want my company to know this. maybe we can find someone else who can arguably give me the same information, we can move forward. Because I think that's something important to know. And lastly, everyone who buys guns, you need to ask the gun dealer that you go to, do you let the ATF copy your bound book? The bound book, which is called the A&D book, the Acquisition and Disposition book. ATF is sending one agent out, I call him a rogue agent, his name is Wynne with a scanner, okay? And they say they didn't buy it for him, he bought it of his own money, is what I've been told. But he goes into dealers and he scans the A&D books. That is the Acquisition and Disposition book. So that tells your name, address, and the specific firearms you own. Because I know you now own a Block 23 ABC 123 bought on this date from this dealer. That's the closest thing to gun registration this country's seen in a while. And we have a problem with it. And so we need to stop it. So you need to ask your dealers, because you let them know that you're watching. And a lot of them are afraid. They feel, look, they licensed me. I don't want them to take my license. They can't take everybody's license if you stand up and say, follow the law. And that's all we want, is following the law. And thank you.
I'm not going to keep you here much longer. I would like to just take a moment and leave you with a happy thought. A couple of days ago, Sean, are you here? One of our good Second Amendment community friends sent me this. And this is something that I would like Catherine Rogers and Wendy Piper and Elaine Andrews of her, even though she's temporarily been booted out of office, but every other legislator to hear, and I'd like her to take this to heart. He writes, "There is not a single thing I can think of that says I love you better than buying the woman you love a firearm. Teaching her safety, teaching her to shoot if she doesn't know already. My thinking behind this is that nothing says I love you better than I want you to always be safe. I want you always to be secure. I want you to be strong. I want you to always come home to me safe and secure. I want you to be able to handle every and any threat as best you can. I want you to be prepared and well equipped for anything. I love you. I recognize and respect your strength and competence. I admire your intelligence. And I know you are well armed to face the world, and I want to know in my heart that you have every advantage possible to face for yourself any threat that may present itself. That is a very good feeling for both men and women alike. And I think that's not a bad thought. Christmas is coming. Not that that's a hint. This is serious stuff, folks. We have these natural rights. We don't think about them much. We may not exercise them the way that we should. But if we don't, like Penny says, they get peeled off a little bit at a time. It's incumbent upon each one of us to defend them. And anyone here today who isn't already in contact with one of us, there's a couple of clipboards over here. If you'd like to leave us your name, your email address, or your phone number, we'll put you on an information distribution list. Whether it's legislation that's coming up, whether it's news we think you should know about, whether it's something as simple as the Earl of Sweeney of the Department of Safety changing his mind and saying maybe I should answer to constituents on how I change a pistol license application. So thank you all again. Wasn't the worst weather, wasn't the best weather, but the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire, along with our other brothers and sisters, are of like mind and like heart. We want you to go home safely. We want you to stay safe. We want you to look after your families. We want you to look after New Hampshire, because if it isn't us, folks, it won't happen. So thank you. Have a safe ride home.
And I was voted in for the House of Representatives in Belmont. And I just, as a follow-up to what you just read here, I have a haircutting shop in Tilton. And in that haircutting shop, we have many people come in, mostly men, but many women as well. And I wanted you to know that in there, we talk about this all the time. We also teach firearms. Joel, who's standing right over here, raise your hand, is an NRA instructor and teaches women all the time about firearms training. And he must love me because he's taught me well. And I think that the main thing also is to educate people on this. There are so many women out there who are scared, and we've had them in the shop. They have come in scared stiff to even touch a firearm. We teach them very carefully, starting from the very beginning. And when they leave, they're proficient and they're excited. They're excited to go to the range and learn. And we need to teach these people right from the beginning how to do this and what it's about. And teach them the positive things, because there are a lot of really positive situations going to the range, meeting wonderful people like all of you. And it's very important. I can't stress it enough. I also want to tell you that I'm honored to be a part of the House of Representatives. I am honored that the people voted me in. And I will do everything I can to stand up for our Second Amendment. Thank you.
Watching a woman leave with that big smile on her face after she's really torn up a target. It's kind of fun. I like that. So,